green technology and transformation. So, also you not here on site, but all the other people on site, let's give him a very warm welcome, Amol Phadke.
Morning everyone, for those in the room and also watching us live. Great fair so far, and I can hope to see more of it through the rest of the day. So, as Anna said, I'm Amol Phadke, Managing Director and GM for our comms business at Cloud. I'm going to pick up from what Claudia said in the break around how we all have to strive towards building a human-centric, sustainable technology. And that's what we are really going to do as Cloud, that you will see from me in the next few minutes. So I wanted to cover three things. Hopefully, all of you can see the material. I wanted to first talk a little bit about how at Google we are building a cloud-native operations model, which is also very, very important to understand as background. I will then talk about how we are using AI and data to build the sustainability that Claudia talked about. And then I will specifically focus on what we are doing to make technology sustainable for everybody, and also the work we are doing with some of our partners and clients globally in order to drive the green technology and transformation. So that's really the key areas I'm going to focus on today. Let's move on. So it's very important to understand how we look at the journey towards a cloud-native transformation. Because when we talk about human-centric technologies and we start talking about how we can build sustainability, it's important to understand this is not something that you can transform overnight. This requires a bunch of things coming together as foundational elements before you can start driving towards sustainability. So for instance, the first thing that you need is a common platform, because anything that you engineer on top of a platform would need to be sustainable. But as soon as you start creating multiple platforms, automatically, by definition, your sustainability goals start to become challenging to achieve. Culture is a fundamental point which will also has an impact on sustainability, and I'll talk about how that is in a minute. I mentioned at the beginning, having a lot of data at your disposal is actually an immensely beneficial point if we use that wisely, because that can really give us insights on where we are not being carbon neutral or carbon free, and that's where that can really help. And again, I will talk about that in a little bit. And of course, having business models that incentivize sustainability, security, and scalability are also going to be key pillars. So those are really some of the pillars that drive towards cloud native. But what does this word cloud native actually mean, right? And in Google, we actually measure how successful we are at driving a cloud native mode of operation. Let me talk about some of the statistics that we as a company measure, and it'll give you a bit of an insight of what we mean by what does cloud native performance look like. Some of the numbers that you will see here, at its peak, and clouds and Google started on this journey for the last 2 decades, at its peak, we are a software-driven company, as we all know. Our code that gets developed, because of the nature of how we now develop code, is 1,000 times more roughly than what we used to be. So just to put it in context, if we are thinking of deploying code into a production network, and let's say that was happening once a year 2 decades ago, that happens 1,000 times a year now. And that's the scale on performance benefit that you get. But it's not just deployment speed, it's also the lead time. So we've also seen a huge advancement in terms of cloud native performance. You see there 6,500 times faster in terms of lead time. What does that number mean? Again, from a conceptual perspective, let's say it took us 4 hours from committing a piece of code to deploying it in production. that 4 hours has now got reduced to 2.5 seconds. That's what I mean when we say 6,500 times faster. In terms of real terms, that's what it means. And similarly, recovery time when you had an issue with your production deployment used to be in hours and is now in seconds, right? So again, that's something that you get through a cloud-native performance. All of that speed and agility that you gain also comes with a lower failure rate. And the reason for this is quite obvious. When you start doing these many deployments at scale, your code base automatically matures. And yes, while you get individual failures a lot more, overall your failure rate goes down. Statistically, the failure rate has to come down given the scale at which you deploy. And you are also almost twice as likely to report on better business outcomes. So that's what I really mean in terms of setting the bar on what cloud-native performance actually looks like. Now, how can you achieve that, right? So there are 3 things you have to do. One, build a culture from my perspective, our perspective, that is really a cloud-native culture. Have sustainability at the core of everything you design, and then use data to drive sustainability. So you'll see for the rest of this session, these are the 3 themes that you will see over and over again: culture, use of data, and sustainability in order to achieve that cloud-native performance. So I'll first start with what we built and pioneered as SRE. And in a nutshell, what does software or site reliability engineering mean? It means when you look at operating your networks or your IT systems or your production environments, we started getting our software engineers, people who developed the code, to actually fix operational issues. This happened 2 decades ago. It created, let's say, a lot of issues at the beginning when you suddenly got software engineers to develop issues and solve for operational issues. But it totally changed the culture of how we approached operations, right? And that's really what became Google SRE as a culture. So at the heart of it, there are 5 principles to these. And why is this so important? You cannot achieve sustainability by having a sustainable agenda and talking about green targets unless the culture of the company actually changes. We firmly believe it is extremely tricky to look at just having a sustainability agenda and then carrying on with operations as you traditionally do. That simply would not work. So that's why from our perspective, the 5 principles are very important. Number 1, we have inside Google a concept called as blameless postmortems. And I emphasize the word blameless because I have been in the industry for 25 years and I understand that when issues happen, and I used to be with a large operator prior to joining cloud. So when issues happen, the first thing is you are going to call up a vendor and blame them for an issue. And it is human nature to do so. Getting the mental discipline for becoming a blameless postmortem actually helps. And we've seen this work in Google because then there is a psychological safety to actually solve the issue. So for instance, if a particular issue happens in a production network inside Google, the engineer has the courage to report things exactly as is, as quickly as possible before sugarcoating it, sending it through various layers of management. And it is very difficult to implement in practice. It's very easy for me to say this on a slide, but it's very difficult to implement in practice. But extremely important point to just bear in mind. The second related topic around culture is almost certainly an SRE mode of operation breaks down silos in any big organization. Google has a large organization, much like Telecom. We have an operations department, we have an engineering department, we have a development organization. And having an SRE organization that has the mandate to look across the organizations was a very important step. Because think of them almost like a SWAT team that comes in when there's an issue and has a blank check to go solve the issue regardless of where the issue is, right? So they have really got that kind of empowerment top down. The third important principle is when you ask a software engineer to look at an operational issue, a couple of interesting things happens. One, they don't like to fix it because it's not cool. But secondly, as you start building that, they start seeing patterns that an operational engineer doesn't see. Because if you're a software engineer, you start seeing patterns as you build solutions for an issue you see. When you see those patterns, you get bored and you build an automation script for it. That's exactly how you start infusing automation at a very basic level when you start implementing SRE across your organization. That's why in Google, we pride ourselves on automating every possible step. Anytime we see an issue, we want to automate that issue. And that actually creates the culture that I described, which is, let us make it better for the whole organization. Let's solve for the organization as opposed to solve for a particular department or team. So let me conclude by saying this culture topic is a fundamental one. I do believe, let's say we get a carbon neutral goal or a carbon free goal, it will be non-trivial to meet that goal if we did not really think through the culture aspect of this and only focused on, let's look at the carbon offsets and let's look at emissions and so on. Culture is an important topic and very, very key for us to solve for that. So let me now turn to the second topic, which is data and how you can use the power of data to drive some of the sustainability challenges that we see in the world. Now, as everybody in this room knows, everybody watching the stream would know, Google is an AI-first company. Our mission from the founding was to ultimately look at information, which is data, and make it accessible to everybody in the world. We realized very early on in our journey that the amount of search queries, because remember, we were a search engine to start with before any of the other things came on. The information that we started getting back overwhelmed the capability of our data centers, overwhelmed the capability of our operations completely, to the point where we had to infuse AI and analytics in every layer of Google's organization. And I will show you that in a second. But it's very important to understand, for us, it wasn't a sustainability goal. For us, implementing AI and analytics was a survivability goal. If Google's business was to be surviving in the 2 to 3 decades, the amount of data we get something like 13 petabytes of data every month going through our platform. It's impossible for any ML or data structure to work without having very sophisticated technology underneath to process all of that data. So we started off by investing, as you all know. We have acquired tremendous amounts of capability over the last 2 decades. We realized that as good as we are, we will not have the expertise needed to solve these problems, which is why we had to invest in acquisitions. DeepMind, API, AI, Lambda, there's a bunch of acquisitions we've done over the last 2 decades. And then we're using it to solve real-world problems. Like when you type a search and you see there is a ranking on search, it is done entirely through an AI analytics engine that runs in the back end. We realized very quickly that we had this vast information store to connect the world to, and we were getting requests coming in. And the only way to solve those very quickly, going back to the SRE example that I gave, any time we see that the search query takes longer than 0.2 seconds, that's our threshold. Our SRE teams would get into action, try to solve the issue, use AI analytics and so on. But there are very specific targets in terms of whether AI is working or not working inside Google. We use exactly the same thing if you look at smart emails that Gmail writes. It is scary that sometimes even when we are using this for our own internal email, I just have to say hi and the rest of the email is there and I just hit send. So it is a bit scary when you see that, but AI analytics is coming in pretty much every application that we build. And I want to finish that before we get into the sustainability by explaining, as I said before, how we have now infused AI in everything we do. So we've taken a very systematic and structured approach. Again, the reason to explain this is to say that we can't just embrace AI. AI and analytics requires a complete change of mindset and culture, and also infusing it in every layer of your organization. So in Google, we ultimately had infrastructure that had to run AI. So we had to invest in building our own AI chipsets, in addition to, of course, partnering with the market. So we came up with our own TPU chipset. Why is that important for sustainability? Our TPU runs 7x times the processing power of AI with the same amount of carbon energy that off-the-shelf CPU, GPU have. This is only possible when you start looking at a problem that is, let me fix this from a sustainability perspective, right? So that was just an example of why we have also invested in hardware. Once the foundational platform is there that can handle the processing of data I talked about, we have then built a set of platform tools. Going back to the beginning slide when I said you need a single platform environment, all of Google uses a single platform environment, whether it's for cloud, whether it's for search, whether it's for mail, and any other application. And that environment, that platform environment, has a set of toolkits available that we also work with partners on, right? So partners use the same toolkit when they want to infuse AI in their businesses when they work with Google. Once you have the platform environment, then you can see you also have a set of custom models and pre-trained models. Google did these, so I'll give you an example. When we work with a partner to implement contact center AI in North America in their contact centers, in a telecom operator's contact centers, the speech-to-text and text-to-speech pre-trained models were the same models that we use internally for Hey Google. Because as you can imagine, Hey Google requires the voice assistant requiring speech-to-text, text-to-speech. So it wasn't like we just came up with a contact center AI solution for our operator clients. We use the same approach of saying we have pre-trained models that can get reused. And why is this important for sustainability? The more you reuse, the less carbon emissions you have. So the more emphasis we always put in Google about reducing waste and standardizing for models. To be clear, we only have less than 10 custom plus pre-trained models across Alphabet. Across the company, 10 models that get reused in every solution set that you build on top. Right? And that's very important to think of it in that standardization way. And then the upper layer is, as I said, where we partner with clients and other ISVs in our ecosystem. And then they build solutions using those models, those platforms, whether it's contact center AI. In the financial services domain, we are working with a couple of partners who are looking at document AI. During the pandemic, a lot of the financial decisions, such as insurances, mortgages, were moving towards getting approvals online and so on and so forth, which requires AI algorithms running in the back end to do those things. So again, we work with our partners, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples on that. So all this to say, as we pivot towards what Claudia said in the break, how can we build all of this in a sustainable way? We have now realized through the work that we do with our ecosystem that sustainability has now come to the forefront, and which is actually a very, very good thing to see. 5 or 6 years ago, sustainability used to be a CSR topic, and there was some funding provided by the CFO because we had to have a sustainability agenda for the organization, but it wasn't really infused. Now it is getting infused. Now when we start talking to any client or partner, then sustainability becomes the number 1 or number 2 topic of conversation in addition to solving the operational problems. So that's why, as I said at the beginning, although we may want to solve operational issues, sustainability becomes hand in hand with that. You can't really do it in a non-sustainable way. And that's why it's very important. We are seeing this change. We are seeing this is the decade to do it. And when I looked at some of the research that Google Cloud looked at, more than a third of our largest telecom operators globally have committed to zero targets by 2030, which is not far. 2050, I should say. So I will give you a sneak peek on what Google is doing with respect to making our cloud platforms and our business greener, and then the work we are doing with partners. And then I will leave you with what are the key imperatives all of us should focus as an industry in order to drive towards the green technology initiatives that we are seeing. So firstly, what did we do? We put it at the core since our founding, which was 15 to 20 years ago. Back in 15 years ago, we were the first silicon tech company, let's say, that had enough high-quality carbon emission offsets done that we achieve our carbon neutral target. So I know we talk a lot about carbon neutrality. We achieved carbon neutrality in 2007 as a business. And we are always striving for doing more, which means 5 years ago, the emissions that were happening, of course, we were still offsetting it because we were wanting to still stay carbon neutral. But even the energy we were consuming became 100% renewable. So we wanted to make sure we are moving towards not even using let's say, the traditional energy sources, and we were moving towards 100% renewable energy. And then by 2030, which is going to be 8 years from now, our goal as Google is to become completely carbon-free. not just carbon neutral, but carbon free. And that's quite a major step, because you can imagine that means we want all energy consumed by the business to be entirely made up out of renewables and not of carbon. It's very, very, very ambitious. We believe we have the toolkit to do that, but it is a very ambitious program. How do we achieve that program? Some of the steps we are taking, and there are more to be done over the next 5 to 6 years. Our data centers, as you can imagine, Google data centers, carrying 10 applications, each with 1 billion plus users, consuming huge amounts of energy. We have these facilities in 25 locations across the world, and 100 plus locations beyond that that are sort of edge locations. If you look at the energy consumption over time, this is the most recent stat from 18 months ago. And I'll benchmark this against typical data centers. We are about 50% less, which means we have a 2x benefit in terms of how we run our data centers. Now, if you look at this in a little bit more nuanced way, most of the savings, carbon savings, is coming from facilities, not so much servers. And I'll talk about why in a second. The facilities point is important. What we've actually done is, in the same footprint, in the same power and energy footprint, we've packed 7x more computing power over the last 2 decades. What that means is our facilities cost in terms of power consumption and energy consumption continues to go down dramatically, which is why you saw the graphic in the previous chart. And that actually helps us continue to drive that. Now, that is solving for the issue of how do we pack more computing power in the same power budget of the data center. But the basic unit of computing, which is the CPUs, the GPUs, and the TPUs, are still consuming a lot more power. And that's the next stage of evolution that we are looking at in terms of how we work with the ecosystem to drive innovation in the hardware, in the silicon layer, because that will really drive down, like, how do you create quiet processors? There is a lot of research going on right now that we are working with our partner ecosystem on. Can you create processors that can actually stay quiet unless there is processing to be done, which is extremely challenging to do at a chipset level. But every nanowatt of power that you would save from being quiet would add up enormously because of the computing power that all of us consume. Right? So that's something that we are working on. And that's why I said at the beginning, like, we built our TPU chipsets to handle AI workloads because we believe that they are 10x more energy efficient than what's on the market. Doesn't mean we don't use things on the market, but we are trying to infuse that innovation thoughts in the ecosystem to drive that energy efficiency to a large extent. So that's why I think this is extremely important to also understand why we are investing. And I said this at the beginning in terms of investments have to be done at all layers, from hardware to data centers and so on. So how can we now offer all of these innovations to our partners and clients, right? So generally we have looked at partnering with retail, with telecom, with financial services clients and partners of ours. And they are generally in 3 buckets. Right? Number 1, how can we help reduce the impact of IT? All operations require IT. How can we create those IT operations in a more sustainable way? Second, how can we create operational sustainability? So I'll give you an example. We are working with a couple of telecom operators who are looking at radio access networks, RAN networks, and correlating that data, let's say, with things like transportation schedules, and you would think why that is the case. So when, let's say, a train comes to a platform, a lot of commuters will get off the train, and you'll see a peak surge in traffic happening because they're suddenly connecting with people. And then vice versa, when the train is in motion, the radio networks next to a train are quiet. But the power that they consume is constant, 24/7 consumption of power, regardless of demand. So we are trying to correlate demand performance with power consumption data to try and see if there's a way to balance this. Again, these are small steps that have a meaningful impact, and a couple of operators in North America are trialing this with us to see how we can make sustainable networks that are less power hungry. And then finally, Claudia said this in the break, Telecom operators, particularly Deutsche Telekom, is a large inspiration to a number of downstream supply chain ecosystem partners. So if you lead the way and drive that sustainability agenda, that actually creates momentum for this to become an ecosystem play. Right? Because otherwise, ultimately, if only one operator does it or one cloud provider does it, it's not going to be enough. The whole community has to do it for the energy sustainability goals to be achieved. I'll talk about specific tools that let you do what I just said. So we have something called Carbon Sense Suite. This is not just for cloud. Any cloud platform that you're using, you could use Google's Carbon Sense Suite. To give you an example, we looked at all the data from the last year with a particular operator just on the projects they were running in cloud. Not just our cloud, any cloud. We found 600,000 kilograms, carbon kilograms worth of idle projects in cloud, projects that have started in cloud. As soon as you start a project in cloud, you're consuming cloud CPU and paying for it, and there was nothing. There was nothing on those projects. That's equivalent of 10,000 trees per year that the operator was losing because they were just putting projects in cloud and not using it. All you had to do was turn them off, and that's the equivalent of planting 10,000 trees. So these are some of the tools that have to get implemented. It's not the only one, we have tons. But these are some of the tools that have to get implemented across the ecosystem for people to really absorb this ethos of sustainability and having a green agenda. Some of the other tools, standard tools, are things like how can we increase the life of devices. It is counterintuitive, given all of us upgrade handsets every year now. I upgrade my handset every year, but I have to put the mental discipline to say, can I use my device longer? That's a big incentive that device manufacturers have to evolve towards. And also trade-in refurbishments, trying to reuse the heap. There was an article I read in Harvard Business Review 2 weeks ago where if we made a heap of all the electronics, that will be bigger than Mount Everest. So you can imagine the amount of electronics we are throwing away, and refurbishing that is also key. Let me finish by summarizing the 5 things that we discussed today. Number 1, don't put sustainability as a side project, as a separate department. That's what our learning suggests. Sustainability agenda needs to be in every department, and we need to have sustainability experts in every department of every organization, in every industry for this to succeed. Having a metric like trees per year or carbon kilograms that are getting wasted, could be anything, but a metric generally is very important because it galvanizes teams. That's again our experience in Google, that brings people together, and then they all drive towards a particular agenda, and then measuring it, which is a third point. Just having a metric is no use if you can't measure it and demonstrate that you are improving over time. Why is that third point also important? You will get a lot more CFO budget from my experience when you show them that actually you're saving money. Otherwise, you get the standard sustainability pot of money. Whereas if you show them the holistic transformation, you will get a lot more done through that. Also, Google was very transparent on some of the things that were not going so well for us. So for example, our Pixel handsets did not have the most efficient processing, let's say. We cleaned that up. Third-party reports showed that. We cleaned that up. Our most recent Pixel now comes with the TPU chipset, the Google pioneered A1 chip that we built, which is dramatically reduced the energy efficiency consumptions. And so therefore, that's an example of being very transparent about where things are working and where things are not working. And then the final point is have some magic moments that actually inspire your end customers. So over the weekend, during pandemic, let's say my family switched to doing online shopping in UK. I'm based in London. And I started seeing, when I did the online grocery shopping, time slots of when my shopping would get delivered. And there was a green symbol next to it from the provider. So I clicked there, and it said, if you take in this time slot, you're going to save 20 trees or something like this. So immediately I clicked that because that's a time that worked for me. So having some kind of real-world, external-facing moments can actually make this a lot more real and that would lead to a lot more widespread adoption of this topic. So anyway, I wanted to leave you with the request to turn this ambition into action. I'm fully behind what Claudia said, and we really have to look at this as a human-centric digital innovation era. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for having me. Hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the fair.
Thank you so much, Amol, for sharing your views and your position from the Google Cloud side. Thank you so much.